Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Sorry, half my family's over here, so and didn't get the tickets on time, so they were like, "Do you have like a VIP list for?" Welcome to Chicago.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Many police I've already seen in your fair city. Apparently.
I have never seen a Chicago police officer in my life. Down in the front. So I'm excited to talk about your book. I've got a lot of questions for you. Immediately, you kind of like had me hooked because we actually went to law school around the same time. You were at Harvard. I was at Wisconsin, which is the Harvard of the Midwest. Maybe University of Chicago's like, excuse me. But, similarly kind of went through law school, graduated, felt a certain amount of disillusionment, and moved kind of away from doing regular law practice. But as I was reading your book, I was kind of like, I wish that I had this book when I was in law school, because there were so many ways in which you broke down all of these things that I had questions about around the Constitution and how laws work. I'm curious for you, what made you decide to write this book right now? And what is something that you really want people to understand about the book?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had the book when I was in law school, too. I might have enjoyed it better. So there are two kind of origin stories for the book. One is just like how I got there, right? And the way that I got there really kind of starts when I'm 17 years old, right? I'm 17 years old, I'm in high school, I'm not getting dates, I'm on mock trial team, because like that's what you do, right? So, and so our mock trial team, it's like pretend court, right? It's not moot court even, it's like acting, but like in legal, it's a really nerdy thing to do. Anyway, our team makes it to the national championships. We lose, but in the national championships in DC, it's like 100 teams, and we lose early, but the finals are judged by like famous people, and our year, one of those famous people was Antonin Scalia. Okay,
that sounds fun.
He does the finals, we watch, and then it's a whole auditorium just like this, 100, or so high school students, and you get to ask questions, and so I got to ask him a question, and my question was, and it wasn't like, remember, I'm 17, so I don't have all the words there, right? But it's something like, Justice Scalia, you support strict constructionism of the Constitution, which is how I understood it. But how can you square that with the reality that sometimes these people were wrong? And sometimes these people did horrible things, like Plessy v. Ferguson. So how can you square your interpretation with the fact that sometimes you guys get it wrong? 17 years old. Interesting question, right? It was fine. Scalia goes, is that what you're teaching these kids? And that's it. That's the answer. All right, so now you make fun of a high school kid in a room full of high school kids, what's gonna happen? Now all the other students are laughing at me. And I sit back in my chair and I'm like, I'm gonna get my fucking answer. I'm gonna law school, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna answer my goddamn question. That was a good question. A lot of my book is the answer to that question. Like, how do these people, how do these conservatives, how do these originalists justify their bullcrap when it is so obvious that throughout history, the 6, 7, 8, 10, 9 members of the Supreme Court have gotten it wrong? How have they gotten it so wrong so often? And how do they kind of live with themselves? How do they justify it? So the book is really my answer to myself when I was 17, right? Why do I write it now? Well, so that's why I write it at all. The reason why I write it now, where I thought it was relevant kind of in the current political milieu, is that the Supreme Court is that they've won, right? Like the book is really explaining how these people have won. and have taken over the Supreme Court and thus their immense power to reshape the law and reshape the rules under which we all must live in their own arch-conservative, originalist, by white men, for white men image, right? Like that's the point of it right now. It's out in paperback now, and I wrote a whole chapter about the Dobbs decision for the paperback. But if you read the book came out before the Dobbs decision, and people were surprised that my chapter on abortion was basically me explaining what the Dobbs decision was going to be and why it was going to be wrong. Mm-hmm. And people were like, well, how did you know what they were going to say? It's like, because if you've listened to these people for the past 30 years, they've been saying it the entire time. Mm-hmm. One thing about conservatives that you have to give them credit for is that they tell you what they're about to do. Right? It's the whole, believe them the first time, right? They tell you how they're going to take away your rights, then they get power, and they take those rights away. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we are at this point, and that's why I thought the book was relevant.
Great. Actually, not great. Because...
Sad.
Yeah, I mean, and I think even like when we were in law school, I'm thinking about it now because I'm seeing a lot of people that I was in law school with, I was like, wow, you're a horrible person. And they're kind of like a judge now. And I'm like, cool. Really looking forward.
I went to Harvard. This is my life.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. So, I mean, I think one of the things that I would love to talk about, you talked broadly about SCOTUS, book for white men, all of this. And then we've got Clarence Thomas. Oh.
Speaking of by white men, for white men.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to do a ... So, Clarence Thomas.
So, Clarence. There are a couple of things that people need to understand about Clarence Thomas, even before we get into the horrible corruption scandal which he is now embroiled in. Number one, you have to understand that I will not call Clarence Thomas an Uncle Tom. It's not the right use of that term. Clarence Thomas has a philosophy. It is an awful philosophy, but it is. Have you ever seen the Saw movies? The horror movies, right? Well, if you haven't seen the movies, the main character, the bad guy in Saw, the reason why he chains people up, and the reason why the movie is called Saw, is that he chains people up and he puts them in situations where the only way they can survive is if they cut off Saw, the part of themselves that's chained up, and so they can get away from the horrible contraption. And the Jigsaw, the bad guy, his thought is that the people who are willing to cut off their hands are the ones most deserving to live, because they are the ones who want to live more than anybody else. And that is Clarence Thomas's philosophy for black people. Those of us willing to cut off ourselves, to cut off our hands, to be crushed underneath the gears of racial oppression and white supremacy, are the ones who deserve the most, because they're the ones they're the ones who have the most desire to live. Mm-hmm. The rest of us who are just like, racism is bad, we should do. No, we're asking for handouts. It's the people who cut off their arms. It's like, look, but I'm still here. That's his philosophy, and it's horrible, but it's throughout all of his opinions. It's throughout all of his life. This is a man who grew up in poverty, and made something of himself, and he's one of those people who thinks that if you don't make something of yourself, then you're worthless, right? So that's number one thing to understand, and we're going to come back to this worthless point in a second. Number two thing to understand is that I have empathy for him because racism is difficult to deal with, and we all know people who have overcome, who have met racism in the face, who have met white supremacy in the face, and risen above. But we never talk about the people who it breaks, who it curdles, who it turns into what they've beheld. Mm-hmm. And that's Clarence Thomas too. The racism that he felt in law school at Yale broke him body and mind and soul. And what you see now is the broken result that racism has done. Does that excuse him? Absolutely not. But it is a way to understand how he became who he is. And then you get into the, well, why wouldn't I take the money? Why shouldn't I be on this yacht? Why shouldn't I go to Indonesia? Why shouldn't this white man pay for my son? That's how the whites do it. Like the current corruption scandal that he is embroiled in now actually works through, if you think about his entire philosophy, it works perfectly. He doesn't think that it's wrong to take these bribes. He doesn't think that it's wrong for his wife to take these bribes. He thinks that he's earned it in some way, right? He thinks that it's how the game is played in some way. Of course he's going to, people are like, oh, he's taking bribes for his decision. No, he ain't. He's going to be a crazy person anyway. He's going to decide what he's going to decide anyway. But if this white man wants to give him a lot of money for like a sentence in an opinion, and this is how it works, right? It's not going to be like Clarence Thomas is going to vote against abortion rights because he was always going to vote against abortion rights, right? But it's little things. It's like in Citizens United, how are you going to phrase the hiding of the dark money, right? If you add in a couple of sentences here and there, you can change the shape of the law. I talk about that a lot in my book, right? And so Thomas thinks that it's okay for him to take this money for it because that's how all the white folks did it. And so it's really, there is a part of Thomas that is a tragic figure. And it's unfortunate that he is now a tragic figure for the rest of us, right? Like I feel tragicked by the fact that he's there. But there is a consistency about his approach to this life that is really sad, but is not completely unique, and you can kind of understand it.
Yeah, I mean it's.
And again, not excuse it in any way.
Yeah.
But like understanding how he got there is also important. Like, and it's one of the things I try to do in the book. I try to understand my enemy, right? I try to understand like what they're trying to do. I feel like I am better able to fight it when I understand where it's coming from. But that also I know you were asking the question, but that also leads me to some of my solutions, because when you understand what these people are truly like, and when you understand what these people truly want, you also then understand that like, oh my God, can we just have some kindness? It's not gonna work. Like, come on, guys, let's just be fair. That's not happening. They don't care. And you have to understand how desperately they don't care in order to like correctly assess the problem and then correctly figure out the solutions to fighting them.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, clap it up. It is interesting hearing you talk about this, because my book, Black Skinhead, was in part inspired by Kanye West. And similar thing, to me, it's about what happens when you lose all community, when you lose all pretense of obligation to one another, of linked fate. Where do you go? What does it take you down that path? And I wrote the book, and then the week I dropped it, he like shows up on a runway with a White Lives Matter shirt, and I was just like, cool, this is cool. Like the research is affirmed, but oh my goodness, like this is horrible.
It's good for the sales, though, right?
Yeah, and I think...
You want to explain that? Buy Black Skinhead, because it's right there.
It's for sale. It's for sale. Plenty of copies. Buy one for your mom. But I think, to me, there's like, it's one thing to talk about, Kanye as a pop figure doing what he does. I think he's dangerous in a bunch of other ways. And then there's another thing to have, somebody of this kind of like philosophy that goes on yachting trips with like Jim Crow. Harlan Crow, sorry. That was a Freudian slip. Then being on the U.S. Supreme Court for an indefinite period of time, making certain decisions. So what do we do about the Supreme Court right now? What does it look like to maybe shift the trajectory that we're on?
Yeah, more. We just need more justices. That's the only solution. I like, there are a lot of solutions that are thrown out that I like. We should have term limits. Totally agree we should have term limits. They're unconstitutional. Just as you read the plain face of the Constitution, you can't get rid of a Supreme Court justice while they're alive. Unless you impeach them, term limits aren't a thing. I would support a constitutional amendment for term limits, but that's also difficult. expanding the court, just adding more justices, that doesn't take a constitutional amendment. That takes an act of Congress. That's just a law. Congress passes it, the Senate passes it, the president signs it, boom, more justices, right? Now, where I differ from some people is that I don't want just a few more justices. I don't want just 3, 4, 5 more justices to make up for the fact that they stole one with Merrick Garland and they stole another with Amy Coney Barrett, and that Thomas is a sexual predator and Brett Kavanaugh tried to rape somebody, and you can get your way to 4 or 5 just on that, right? But that's to me that's thinking small. I want. He did try to rape somebody.
Allegedly.
I believe, just speaking for myself, I believe that he may have tried to rape somebody.
Yes.
In any event, I think that's thinking small. I think we need 20 more justices. I would be happy with 30 more justices. I want the Supreme Court to be way, way bigger than it is right now for a number of reasons, not all of them partisan. Sure, 20 more justices that would agree with me, great, awesome, sign me up. But I would take 20 more justices, and 10 of them agree with the other guys, and 10 of them agree with me, and I would still argue that that's better. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The main reason is all right, so it's a family auditorium, but let's see if I can do this correctly. If you have to organize dinner, right, if you have to organize a night out with 4 or 5 of your friends, you're John Roberts, you got to get 4 or 5 of your friends to go somewhere, right? You can convince 4 or 5 of your friends to go to some places, right? You can convince 4 or 5 of your friends to go to some places you ain't supposed to go, right? You might go to some place down under, get some thunder. You might do some things with your 4 or 5 friends, right? If you have to organize dinner for 20 people at a family reunion, if you have to organize dinner for 30 people at a family reunion, you're going to go to Applebee's. You're going to go to the Olive Garden, right? You're going to get your breadsticks, and you're going to be happy, and then you're going to go home, and you're not going to do anything because that's the only thing that you can get that number of people to agree on. It's the blandness that actually becomes its strength. And Lord, that's what I want from the Supreme Court. More bland decisions, more middle-of-the-road, narrow, mainstream decisions, and I get that if John Roberts now has to convince 15 other people to have his way on a 29-person court for a 15-14 decision. Are you kidding me? That 15-14 decision, just by the nature of the law, its complications, random people doing random things all the time, that's going to be a much more narrow decision. People want term limits, as I said. Term limits are hard to do. But you give me 30 justices, they're going to die. Kind of on a cycle, right? The vagaries of ham sandwiches and hunting trips and whatever, people are gonna die. And you're gonna get to replace them in due course, in due time, right? So that's another benefit. It is ridiculous that I can tell you, you give me a case, I can tell you how the votes are gonna be right now. It's ridiculous that I can do that. I shouldn't be able to do that, and I wouldn't be able to do that if you had 30 people, because what you would do is what you do on the lower courts. The California, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that covers California and a bunch of other Western states. They've got 29 judges on that circuit, and you know what they do? They don't hear every case as a 29-member body. That's just crazy. They hear most of the cases on a 3-judge panel. Those 3 judges are chosen by random lot. And so you don't know which judges you're going to get for your crazy case, right? So maybe you want to say, abortion is bad, let's get rid of that, but you don't know which 3 of them you get. You might get a panel of Roberts, Sotomayor, and Kagan, and that's a whole different abortion case than if you have than what we have when you know that you're going to get all 9. Now, on the on the Ninth Circuit Court and all the other Circuit Court of Appeals, after that 3-judge panel decision, there is an opportunity to appeal. There's an opportunity to appeal to the full circuit. You can always go en banc, as it's called, and have the case heard by all 29 people. And I'm sure that in the hot-button cases of abortion and whatever, that would happen. But in some of these just below the most desperate cases, a lot of them, the 3-judge panel ruling is the ruling. And that has a whole lot of effects for the appearance of propriety on the court. One of the things that the conservatives will argue when they are defending the right of their people to take bribes honestly, their defense is going to be, well, it's super hard to recuse. Because there are only 9 of us, and if one of us recuses, then it's down to 8, and we could be deadlocked, and who the hell knows? If you have, again, if you're seeing most cases in a 3-judge panel, it's very easy to be like, dude, you have to recuse. You can't be one of the 30 of us, you can't be one of the 3 of us on this case when your boy that's in this case is paying for your secret son's tuition. You just can't be on the case. Sorry. Right? That's not hard to legislate, right? So like you have this, again, again, this is why I'm saying, give me 20 more justices and I will give Mitch McConnell 10 of them. That's how better this system is. I will still, right now we are 6-3. If you make it 16-13, my side still loses most of the time, and I promise you we have a better court. And that over the course of time, I'll worry about those other 3 people. Like, I'll find my way to get around those other 3 people. I haven't even talked about diversity. Right now, we're in this kind of always the situation where we don't, even when we have like better racial and gender diversity, we don't have diversity of education. Most of the people went to Harvard or Yale, not to Wisconsin, not to IU, not to Michigan, not to like where most people go to school. So there's a group think that happens on the Supreme Court because we lack intellectual diversity on the court. That starts to be easier when you have way more people. There's never been an Asian American person on the court. It's probably time for that. There's never been, Sotomayor's the only Latino on the court. Probably could have another one. You know, like there is a lot that you can do if you just give me more people. So always when I talk about the Supreme Court, I am Kermit the Frog in Muppets Take Manhattan, man. We need more bears and dogs and cats and chickens and things in the show.
Well said. Thank you. I want to pivot a little bit because I think, so one of the many things I love about your book is that when you make these arguments, you're making both the arguments that, you know, the Constitution is trash, but also even if you believe in these aspects of the Constitution, it is being willfully misinterpreted in a number of different realms by people that call themselves kind of originalist, which again was like one of these things I'm like, I wish I had this in law school. But I mean, one of the things that really I found myself thinking about this morning is the stuff that you talk about around how the Constitution is weaponized to justify cruelty and inhumanity on all of these number of levels. And I woke up thinking about Jordan Neely, 24-year-old kid on a train getting choked out by a former Marine, and it feels so unfair. And already starting to see people in different levels, try to justify this in a number of different ways. I know you've talked about what's going on right now, and I'd love for you to bring that into this conversation.
You know, one of the things about the law that I find really disgusting is that most of the cruelty that we see in the world, most of the cruelty that we have seen historically in the world has been legal. What societies do, not just our society, but what historical societies do, you can go back to 1939 Germany, you can go wherever, you can go back to Sparta. What? That's right. That's always the connection, right? Like what else seemed really fascist? Oh, Sparta. The law changes to acknowledge the cruelty already inherent in the society. The law does not stop the cruelty inherent in society. The law codifies the cruelty inherent in society, right? And we see that in our modern times with our death penalty decisions, right? We shouldn't be killing people. We shouldn't be killing people. We just shouldn't. And I say that as a person, like, if you killed my family, I would want somebody to kill. I would, if somebody, murdered, God forbid, people I like, right? I would want to. I don't even have to make this theoretical. My dog was killed in October by a motorist. My kids, it was Halloween. Kids came home from school. We opened the door to let them in. The dog kind of bolted because she saw the kids. Ended up in the street. This woman, the stop sign was on the bus, and you're not supposed to go past the bus with the stop sign out, but this woman did. and ran over my dog and killed it. And I could have, right? I wanted somebody to like kill her dog, right? Buy her a dog and then kill it so that she feels what I feel, right? I would want that to happen. The state should stop me, right?
Yes.
The state should stop me and my vigilante justice. They shouldn't allow me to be John Wick. That's not cool, right? That's not something that the government should allow. But our government does allow because our laws codify the cruelty that we demand in our societies. And it always does that, right? When you look at what happened then, so then you look at what happens to people like Jordan Neely. And, you know, I have been on the subway where a person is screaming and seems crazy and whatever. And I have been afraid. I'm a giant man, right? I'm a giant man, and I have been afraid from people like when I'm on the subway, man, I just want to get home. I don't want to be in social justice mode. I just want to be in get my ass home so I can play my video games mode, right? So I have been afraid and I have been scared, and so I kind of understand what those passengers were thinking right up until the point where the other guy jumps up and starts to kill that man. And that's where your humanity is supposed to kick in, right? That's where something inside you is supposed to say don't, guys, he's had enough. He's down. Stop, kill it. You're choking him to death. Stop. Somebody should have said that. Nobody said that. The law was never the thing that was going to step in and stop that from happening. Not the law in terms of keeping Jordan Neely off the train. Not, New York City subways are heavily policed, right? There were no cops that were going to be there to protect the passengers from Jordan Neely. There was nobody that was going to protect Jordan Neely from the other passengers. The law was a theory in that moment. The only thing that was real in that moment was the humanity of the people involved, and that's what didn't happen, right? And that didn't happen for no reasons. It didn't happen because Jordan Neely was poor, and people don't see poor people as people. It didn't happen because Jordan Neely was black, and people don't see poor black people as the ones suffering. There's lots of reasons why the humanity didn't kick in, but that's when the humanity was supposed to kick in. The law was always going to be useless in the moment. Now, after it happened, there's some law that can happen, right? The idea that, I've made this analogy, Barack Obama could not walk up behind a crunchy, homeless white boy, choke him out, and then walk away. That could not happen, right? There is no black man alive that could just walk up, kill a white person for any reason, and just walk away without being arrested, interrogated, lawyering up, all of these things. Even if later the killing was ruled justified in some way, you don't just get to go home that day. Daniel Penny, who has now been identified, I'm not breaking news, that was identified this morning, the man who killed Jordan Neely, Daniel Penny got to go home that night. And that's where the law, again, kind of completely breaks down, right? Where we see so obvious that there are two different systems of justice, one for white people, one for black people. And look, I would have some, I don't think that the killing was justified by any means, but I don't think that it was murder one, right? I think there are some mitigating factors in that situation. I think it's manslaughter one, frankly, right? And I think you can make that argument, but manslaughter one is still an unjustified homicide that people go to jail for. And what you're waiting to see is I don't know how people like Alvin Bragg, how prosecutors can, Alvin Bragg is the Manhattan district attorney, I don't know how they go home with themselves sometimes, right? I don't know how they understand. Bragg is a black man. He knows for sure that what I said is true. He knows for sure that his office would immediately prosecute a black man who did that. And he knows that his office is not immediately prosecuting, still investigating those white men who did that. And I don't know how he lives with himself like that. I don't know how he squares that circle. I couldn't.
Yeah. Thank you for that. where do I go from here?
So let's talk about takings.
Let's talk about what?
Takings.
Takings.
You said eminent domain. Let's go.
Yeah. Okay, wait. We'll get there. So, I want to talk a little bit also about, in the book you say you could make the argument that the 14th and First Amendments are the only ones that we really need.
Yeah, I can run a whole country with just those two amendments.
Yeah, make that argument.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay, so you need, the 14th Amendment says there's equal protection of laws for everybody, right? And that there's due process of laws for everybody, which has been interpreted to mean substantive due process for everybody, which basically means fairness, that the laws have to be equal and fair. That's what the 14th Amendment says. And if you think about that, then you don't really need any of the other amendments, right? You don't need the 13th Amendment. Slavery is prohibited. Sure, but the 14th Amendment also says that there's equal protection, so I don't even need to get to slavery. Obviously, slavery is unequal, duh, right? I don't need the 15th or the 19th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote if I have the 14th Amendment, right? Equal protection of laws. That means everybody gets the vote. Boom, done, we're set, right? And you can kind of go on and go on and go on. You need the First Amendment because, like, I also have to be able to tell the government to go fuck themselves, and like that wouldn't, you could have a law that's like equal for everybody that says you can't tell the government to go, and I'm like, but no, I got to be able to stay. So you need the First Amendment for that. But other than that, you need the First Amendment for your right to protest, and you need the 14th Amendment to make sure that everything else is fair and equal, and then that's all you need. Everything else is like a suggestion. And so, that's why, one of the problems that I feel like my side of the argument, liberals have, is that conservatives have this, like, really, it fits on one of their dumb truck bumper stickers about, like, we just want the original Constitution. Like the founders said, like they have it so like they've got it focus grouped, right? They've got a really simple, catchy phrase, right? And the liberals don't, right? We're just like, well, I want good judges who like to be. And it's a real problem for us, right? So one of the things that I've tried to do is like, what's my bumper sticker? And mine is 14th Amendment or GTFO. Equal protection and due process or get out of my face. Every single law should be able to meet the criteria of equal protection and fairness. And if it's not, I do not want to talk about your stupid law. And so that is my counter to originalism, that everything has to be put through the lens of the 14th Amendment, because of the 14th, and here's the other thing about the 14th. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and I would include the 19th Amendment in this, although it's not technically a Reconstruction Amendment. If you do not think that these amendments are the most important and have fixed the Constitution, then the entire document is illegitimate. Because nobody like me, nobody who looked like me, nobody who talked like me, nobody who thought like me, got any say in the original Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Nobody was asking the slaves whether or not they thought the drawing and quartering should be illegal, or nobody was asking women, like literally any women, nobody was asking them. And it's ridiculous to expect. There is no other civilization on this planet that expects people to live as free people under the rules of their captors. So either we have not been captured, and the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments are as important as I think they are, or you can take your whole Constitution and throw it in the garbage because it doesn't apply to me, because it can't, because you brought me here against my will when you wrote that. Right? It's only once we get to the point where, my answer, I was saying on the way here, my family on my mom's side from Mississippi, we can trace our ancestry all the way back to a man named Zachariah who was freed from the Pittman plantation when Sherman marched through burning the shit out of the South. We can go all the way back to that, right? And so I say, if you cannot show me where my ancestor, Zachariah, got to have a say in all this, then I'm still on that plantation. So either the 14th Amendment means what I think it means, or I don't acknowledge the authority of this government over me. And when I put it like that, most people are just like, I think we should just go with the 14th Amendment, right? Like, right? When it's just like it's that, or I'm not subject to your laws. Most people can be like, okay, kind of equal protection, it's good, no, it's fine, we'll do it.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. So I want you to get that in. So we're in Chicago. This is where my family has lived since the early 1900s. And when you travel through Chicago, you see a lot of segregation. And you see a lot of sort of hidden histories of the ways in which Black people built and thrived even within those kind of, and maybe in some ways especially because of those kind of like boundaries of segregation. And yet, even when trying to have like, kind of a piece of ours, which is another thing I read about in my book, a lot of that has been taken. Like when we often have discussions around reparations or around other things, it's often under this sort of false assumption that Black people never had anything. But there's a long history of Black people having land, having things that were taken. And you talk about this in the book, and as you were talking about New York and the history with Seneca Village, which I'll let you get to, I thought about Chicago and some of the ways in which eminent domain has been used by Mayor Daley on to kind of like rip apart Black communities. And in fact, Lorraine Hansberry, who's the author of Raisin in the Sun, her family last month filed another lawsuit and is asking for reparations because of a lot of land that was taken from them in the 40s and 50s under eminent domain and urban renewal. And so these issues are very much alive for us even today. I'd love for you to talk about some of that and your thoughts around the theft of Black land, and where do we go from here?
Sure. So Central Park, New York, kind of expensive land, is built on the bones of one of the only free Black communities in New York. It was called Seneca Village. It was a free and open Black community. It had something like 20% of the wealth of Black people in New York State was in that community. And when it came time to build Central Park, they just took it. They just took it from them. They use the government's power under eminent domain, which is the Fifth Amendment's right of the government to take property for public use for fair compensation. They didn't give those people fair compensation, and that village is gone, and all the wealth that could have been generated for years of, let's say they had done the park, but without Seneca Village, then Seneca Village, this free Black land-owning village, would have basically the same real estate that we now think of as Central Park West. Some of the most expensive real estate in the world. How much are their plots worth? Any one of those plots, any one of those little 40 by 40 plots would go for multiple $billion today if they had been allowed to keep it. So this gets me to the only Republican part of my book. I agree generally with Republicans that the government's power for eminent domain, for takings, should be greatly reduced. This is surprising to liberals who generally think of eminent domain as good because the government is a force for good and the government needs to sometimes take land to do socially good things. Sometimes we need a hospital and we've got to find the land for it. Sometimes we need a prison and we've got to find the land for it. Sometimes we need solar panels, and you, Mr. Rich person with your acres and acres of land, we could probably put some wind turbines or solar panels on your property. Wouldn't bother you none, but it would have, great energy savings for the rest of this country or the state, and we're going to take your land, and we aren't going to, we don't care that you're angry about your view today, right? That's the liberal version of eminent domain. But often enough, eminent domain is we're going to build a highway right there, right? See those Black people? There. No, not there. There. That guy. Take that man's house, and then Tyrone's down the street, Don't forget Shay Shay. That's how they built the highway, right? Oh, we need a new sports arena. See those Latinos over there? Take all their shit. Take it now. That's where the new stadium's going. Eminent domain is used to break up communities of color, to especially communities that aren't able to pool resources together to buy the lawyers, basically, to fight it. And eminent domain is used for gentrification. I mean, you've already said the big boo word there, urban renewal, right? Urban renewal means that we're going to take your community, your housing lot, your street, and we're going to give it to Starbucks. That's urban renewal, right? And that is authorized under the Fifth Amendment and under the constitutional power for takings. And I think that it's wrong. And so I agree with Clarence Thomas and his dissents in the big takings case called Cleo versus City of New London. This was a case where, and I hate that this case, because it's like, and again, like this is really hard for me, because it's like, it's a white lady with a nice pink house, and she didn't want to give the house, and they were going to take her pink house, and she was sad. Like, obviously, I think that I wish the big seminal case had been about the Latinos who got their land taken for the stadium, or about the black people who got their land taken for a highway. But no. White lady with the pink house. Okay. So the government... So Connecticut was going to take her house and give it not to the state of Connecticut to do whatever. Connecticut wanted to take her house and give it to a private developer to do private development stuff that would be private. But the state would get the tax dollars, and so they said that it wasn't a public use, but it was a public purpose. And that previously we had only given eminent domain for like actual public uses. So like we're going to build a stadium, somebody else is going to build a stadium, and they're going to own the stadium, and we're not going to charge them rent, but that's it, right? But profit somehow will be for the public, right? So the Cleo case was to authorize the moving from public use to public purpose, and the state won. 5-4, liberal Justice Breyer wrote the decision for supporting the state, and Clarence Thomas wrote the big dissent, being like, "This is bullshit. It's not a public use. It's clearly just so you're taking this lady's house and you're giving it to private developers, and that's not power the government should have." And I agree, that's not a power the government should have. And I think we see it, in our communities all the time. The government, again, I love that you tied this to reparations, because, again, when people are talking about the reparations thing, they're thinking almost like people want reparations for like sad, right? The white man made us sad, and we should have some money because it was really hard. No, you took our shit.
Yes.
It was ours. We had it. It was there. It was like actual land. Things were growing on it, and you took it from us. Give it back. Right? I mean, I know I sound like a Native American, quite frankly, right now. Like, this is our stuff. Give it back. So that's kind of, I really don't think that the government should have nearly as much power. There are some times when I think that I end up being really in favor of what's called regulatory takings as opposed to actual land taking. So, hey, rich person, that house that you bought, you can't tear it down because it's actually like the Taj Mahal. Like, we just have to, we can't, but I want to make it a Walmart. Like, no, you can't. Like, that's what we call a regulatory taking. You have a beach house, but like once every 6 months, the turtles come up and they walk through your beach house to get to the sea, and they need it, or else all the turtles are gonna die. And so for like once every 6 months, I say, guess what? You can't put lights on your house because we need the turtles to live. And like, that would be a regulatory taking. That means using the power of the government to say, like, no, you can't use your property in the way that you want to because turtles. And that'll piss people off. So, like, I do agree that the government should have this regulatory power to regulate the use of people's private property in ways that benefit the state. And we should pay them money. I'm happy, like, If I make you turn your lights off and you can't have your clam bake or whatever, like, here's $10. Like, whatever the market value is, like, I'm happy with that. But the government should have the power to regulatorily kind of restrict the use of land. I just am very skeptical about the government having the power to just straight up take land from somebody else and give it to a private investor.
Thank you. We're about 5 minutes to open Q&A, so folks have your questions, start to get ready in your head. I want to thank you again for your time. So I think for my last question, I would love to know, because I think for me personally, I see stuff happening in the world. I see things are like terrible, and I get like, I don't know that we're gonna make it. I don't know that we're gonna get to this like place where it truly the 14th Amendment means something for everybody. And I have to like draw my resources to find hope. Like for you, what are some of the things that you see and think about that bring you to a place of optimism that we can get? I mean, maybe not in our lifetimes, but like, you know.
Oh man, I mean, I get asked this question a lot, and I never have a good answer.
What scares you the most, if you want to flip it?
Things are really dark, and I think that I'll tell you the positive. For basically ever since I got to law school, so 20 years ago now, right? It has been obvious that they are coming for abortion rights.
Yeah.
Obvious. Like that's, again, they tell you what they're going to do before they do it. And for 20 years, people were just like, yeah, but you know, I don't like her, how she laughs. I don't like her smile. I don't want to vote for her. I like having a beer with that guy. I like the reasons that people would find to vote for Republicans or vote against Democrats when at every point Roe has been on the ballot were maddening to me. It was maddening to me. I spent all of 2016 being like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 82 years old, right? Like, I want to hear. I don't care. I don't care what you think about her. I don't care. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 82 years old. You don't mess with that. It's like, period, end of story. But you couldn't get people to listen. Couldn't get people to listen. Now people are listening. And so it's sad that they're listening because the other side's won, but all of a sudden people are just like, oh, this Supreme Court, probably have better, you know. And so like the fact that at some level my hope is that Republicans are the dog that caught the car, right? They finally got everything they wanted, and now people are seeing just how bad that is for everybody else, and maybe people will start voting that way. I think we saw a sign of it in 2022, right? Like that was, I resist the whole like, we won in 2020. No, we didn't win. We still got our asses kicked. Like we still lost the House, and you know, but we didn't get beat as hard as we could have, and we didn't get beat as hard as we could have, perhaps because people are starting to realize that you have to take this seriously, and you have to take this seriously every election. That who you vote for senator and who the senator is going to appoint to not just the Supreme Court, but also all the other federal courts, maybe that's kind of important. Maybe not having the guy in Texas who's just like, abortion pills should be unconstitutional because they make people sad, like, which is actually his legal ruling. His legal ruling, I'm not joking, is that the FDA's approval of the abortion pill was unconstitutional because it did not fully consider how taking an abortion pill would make a woman sad. And that maybe women and pregnant people who'd had abortions were too traumatized to sue. That's his actual legal argument. He's a judge for life. Yeah. And that's what happens when you elect John Cornyn and Ted Cruz to be senators from Texas. That's who you get. And as people are starting to maybe realize that, that is my vector for hope. That is like how I think we get around. Once Republicans have won everything, maybe people will see why it's important to resist them. May the 4th be with you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. If folks have questions, raise your hand, and somebody's going to come get you with a microphone.
Great, thank you for raising your hands. Do not follow I do have to remind you to keep your comments to a minimum and questions only, nice and brief, and speak directly into the microphone. First question's right here.
Can we talk about a subject that we haven't discussed yet? Donald John Trump. So, can you talk about where do you see the cases that he currently has going? Is it possible we could have a rapist for a presidential candidate?
Yes.
2, how the how minority rule, the MAGA movement and minority rule is permeating what is going on here.
Okay, the first one's a little bit easier for me to answer than the second one, so I'll start there. Donald Trump is not going to jail. And because he's not going to jail, he's going to run for president again. And that's just where we are. Now, the reason why he's not going to jail, I believe, is because the Department of Justice did not do the things that was necessary to prosecute him in a way that would make him go to jail. Right? Like if he was going to go to jail, that was a Merrick Garland decision that Merrick Garland had to make basically from March 2021 when he got in there, right? Merrick Garland would have had to say, like, okay, everybody come close, all you DOJ people. We're going to put Donald Trump in jail. And everything we do from this moment forward is going to be around the idea of getting Donald Trump into a jail cell. If he had done that, maybe we'd be in a different place. But he didn't do that, clearly, and so we are where we are. The rape trial against that he's in with E. Jean Carroll in New York, I think he is going to lose that, but that is a civil trial, not a criminal trial. So that is a money damages thing. The indictments that he has in New York from Alvin Bragg for bookkeeping fraud, that is not a thing that you send people to jail for. I mean, just yes, they're classy felonies, and technically you would send a person to, but like you would send a person who is like a multiple offender, you know. And Donald Trump has a clean record. Because prosecutors have not, I mean, I'm right, but like because prosecutors have not gone after this man before. Donald Trump is a first-time offender for all of this, so he's not going to jail in New York. Fani Willis in Georgia, this is the election fraud cases. You just might have heard she gave immunity to all of the fake electors. That sounds to me like she's about to indict him for something, right? And I do think that that is the most perilous case that he is in, but here's the thing, and I want to also mention Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, who is, you know, I've made this argument before about Jack. Like, people are like, do you trust Jack? And I'm like, you know, have you ever been dumped before? Right? And so, like, you know, I feel like I've been dumped. I'm just like, not you, Jack. I can't. I'm not ready to love again. I can't. Robert Mueller hurt me so bad. I can't. I don't want to talk to you, Jack. Go away. I mean, that's how I feel about that man, right? Like, he might be the guy, right? He might be my forever prosecutor, but like,
he could be a rebound.
Right? I'm not ready. In any event, I don't think both the Jack Smith prosecution and the Fani Willis prosecution, they're running up into the time problem, right? Whenever you want to charge Trump, you've got to understand that there's going to be about a year between charges and trial. Well, a year from now is the middle of the 2024 election. Mm-hmm. And I don't see how you bring the nominee of a major party to trial during the election. And I'm a person who's willing to do a lot of things to, like, you know, I'm a person that does not stand on ceremony. But the idea that, you know, how do you even choose a jury for that? You know, how do you choose a jury when the man is months away from a general election? I don't know how you do it. So I think that those prosecutions, if we want to see them put Trump in jail or have real accountability, you're going to have to first defeat Trump at the ballot box before you get to those trials. Oh yeah, I mean that's what they want. That's what they wanted the Supreme Court for. So like the whole point of minority rule is that the reason why McConnell was willing to invest as much as he did in the Supreme Court is because the Supreme Court is the one that can stand against the elective branches of government. What you need to control the Supreme Court are 5 people, right? You can have 30 million people on one side. If you got 5 people, and those 5 people on the Supreme Court, everything stops. And that's what McConnell always understood, and that's what Democrats basically never did.
We have one question right here.
I believe at some point in your book, I read you started on We the People, Who are we and who are those of us female of color who didn't count? So I've raised kids who protest, living here in Chicago, Laquan McDonald, the Iraq War, from the time, a lawyer married to a lawyer from the time I had kids. And now my daughter lives about 6 blocks from Ralph in Kansas City, who was shot in the face. We're kind of tired of protesting. Mm-hmm. We're kind of tired of doing pro bono work. What do you suggest that we, the people, do?
Yeah, so y'all live in Chicago. You got a senator that doesn't take my calls. This is the honestly call. At some point, politicians have to understand that people are taking issues of criminal and social justice seriously and want to see that reflected in the federal judiciary. One of the big differences between Democrats and Republicans on this issue is that every Republican knows that if you are not on the line, on Leonard Leo's line, on the Federal Society line, on the Supreme Court, you will lose. I will just take you back to 2016, right? 2016, Donald Trump is out there. I'm a crazy person. I'm an anti-establishment. Supreme Court, here's my list. Totally normal, straight down the middle, Republican. And then I'm back to the crazy person and Mexicans are... Donald Trump knew in 2016 that he could not trip the wire of the Supreme Court. If you look at his list, which actually isn't even who he appointed, it was the most anodyne, normal Republican Federal Society list of Supreme Court nominees. Republicans understand that they cannot win elections. They cannot win elections they cannot win primaries if they are weak on the Supreme Court. Tell me, please, the last Democrat anywhere who lost a vote because they were weak on the Supreme Court. Joe Biden, of the 13 people, including the coffin man who was running for the Democratic nomination, Joe Biden was the weakest on the Supreme Court by a long way, and it didn't cost him jack. It didn't cost him a vote. There has not been a primary that I have seen, and I've watched a lot of them, where the candidate who was weaker on the Supreme Court lost the election because they were weaker on the Supreme Court. And until that starts happening, until Democrats understand that they cannot get elected unless they are putting forward judges and advocates and attorney general choices that are going to do the people's work, Democrats will continue not to do it, right? I argued so hard against Merrick Garland during the transition. Like, you have no idea. I have entire articles that I had a whole article about like why Merrick Garland was bad for the country that was set to publish on the day he was set to be announced as Biden's Attorney General pick. That day was January 6th, 2021. And I'm basically hovering over the publish button, watching the calendar, being like, oh shit, this is not today. Right? Like the idea that Merrick Garland was the wrong choice for so many reasons, and that people saw that coming from a mile away. But like, at what point during the primary did anybody even ask, hey, who would you appoint for Attorney General? Like, that wasn't even like, who you're going to be for Vice President? Well, we care about that. Even though the Vice President has, in this context, so much less power than the Attorney General. When they started floating Kamala Harris's name, I was like, oh shit, she's gonna be AG. She's gonna be VP. Okay. I mean, it's great, it's historic, it's great. I needed somebody in the AG's office who was gonna put foots up asses, right? And nobody asked the candidates who they were gonna pick, right? That's a Democratic thing that we can, so when you say what people can do, it's not just that we have to vote. I am sick of telling people to vote, people vote. I am sick of telling people to vote harder, right? People vote, people are trying. So what I'm trying to do is like, we need to ask better questions of our candidates and hold them to the answers to those questions as they get into office.
We have time for one more question, and before we end, I do have to ask you all to please remain seated until our guests have exited the venue. It's a little crowded in here, but thank you very much for coming out. Our last question is against the wall here.
Thank you for coming, good sir. Oh, can you hear me now? My question to you is about Chapter 6. Thank you for delving into qualified immunity. That is deeply disturbing to me. Do you think, at the height of the culture wars that we're in right now, how do you think we'll get to a place, or do you think we'll ever get to a place where we can tip the balance and really modify that and just really put that in a place where it just makes sense?
Yeah, so qualified immunity is the idea that if you are performing your official duties, you cannot be sued for constitutional violations you commit while performing your official duties, which is wild, which is absolutely wild. You can understand it in certain contexts, right? Like, you don't want the meter maid to constantly be getting lawsuits being like, oh, you stole my car. No, I towed your car. You stole it. I'm going to sue you for stealing. You don't want that to happen all the time, so you have some kind of qualified immunity for that, right? But when it comes to the cop who's shooting you after not getting a warrant, and you're just like, you didn't get a warrant, you violated my constitutional rights, and then you shot me, and just like, can't sue me for violating constitutional rights because I was a police officer when I did that. Like, what? You're police. You're supposed to. That's like the most time you're supposed to respect. No, right? So this is a thing that people have identified as one of the three ways, to me, that police get away with murder. It's qualified immunity. It's our use of force, kind of understanding on how we let the police use excessive force all the time. And it's the fact that we then we use their friends to prosecute them as opposed to independent bodies. But qualified immunity is one of those three pillars that they rest on. Like, how do you get people to change it? Like, the funny thing is that I think most people, when they understand what qualified immunity is, don't like it. Like, most people understand, when they understand what qualified immunity does and what it allows to happen, they don't like it. The qualified immunity is unpopular as a political proposition. What's popular as a political proposition is killing black folks. And that's the problem, right? Because you could get culturally lots of people against the idea of qualified immunity. But when you say that will decrease the ability of cops to shoot black people to death in the street when they feel like it, that's where you get the problems. That's when you get to be, oh, but I like it when they shoot black people to death in the street. It makes me feel big and strong. That's when you get the problems, right? So, like, how do you, I'm sorry. So, like, how do you get people to basically, what you're really asking is, how do you get people to not want to shoot black people to death? And if I had an answer for that, I'm sure they would give me a prize of some kind, in Sweden, right? I know.
Well, you should get all the prizes. Thank you for coming here, spending the afternoon with us.